All right, I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight, Dr. Brandi Walker. Dr. Walker is the founder of Villages Overcoming Intersections, the collaborative empowerment, also known as Voice for Neurodiversity, focused on research and developing culturally conscious, culturally sensitive training for professionals who provide support to neurodiverse individuals. She also has a private practice dedicated to providing educational, clinical, and psychological guidance and expertise to organizations seeking to improve their social climate and enhance their diversity and equity awareness. She is an alumna of Howard University and the University of Maryland and a former Army clinical psychologist and faculty member at Womack Army Medical Center at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. She recently retired from active duty, but still conducts research with service members. She spent the last 8 years working with various hospitals, clinics, and schools, conducting research on children with ADHD, their families, and various sleep variables and environmental factors. She collaboratively initiated the Prince George's County CHAD chapter and the Southern Regional Support Center. So, Dr. Walker, we are so excited to have you here tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Marcy. I appreciate the introduction. Thank you, PGCPS, for the opportunity to have a conversation with parents and with you all and just share some lessons that we're learning and what we're seeing, and more importantly, talk about what it is that parents might be seeing with their children. Now, this topic of neurodiversity, I think is pretty interesting, and sometimes the thing that was the behind the scenes, oh, so that's what it was, right? It might feel like a bit of a mystery because we may see some behaviors and we're not understanding where they're coming from. And rather than assuming that the behaviors are a child misbehaving or being defiant, or an adolescent or a young adult who just keeps making bad decisions, um, taking a deeper look may help us understand that things may not be what they seem, and that someone may not just be defiant or having a rough time all the time or displaying tantrum type behaviors or always forgetting things or having all of these issues with getting homework done, um, but love to play video games. We may need to step back and see if there's something else going on, because in the land of neurodiversity, generally there is. And neurodiversity is really all about how the brain is working and if it's functioning properly in all areas. That's really important because if there is neurodiversity in the brain, and the brain doesn't necessarily recalibrate and get back on track where everything is functioning the way it needs to function, then this is a challenge that a person will deal with over the entire course of their lives. Okay? So if you suspect something is off with your child and is potentially falling in one of those categories that I kind of mentioned, forgetfulness, um, all of these challenges with getting schoolwork done, it feels like they're not managing their emotions or their emotional response well. Um, and then in addition to that, not being able to stay on task, not displaying motivation, having a hard time organizing, keeping things together, um, being able to kind of come up with a plan or have steps to follow, and just having issues with following those steps consistently, then let's talk about what it could potentially be. So, just a little bit of knowledge around what neurodiversity is, and then this phrase neurotypical. So, neurodiversity is really this range of differences in individual brain function, meaning how the brain does what it's supposed to do. And everybody knows the brain is a powerful machine, it does a lot of different things. And so, the way that the brain is able to do what it needs to do if it's really stronger in one way, but very much not strong in another way. That could be potentially neurodiversity. And it will show up in behavior, as well as regulating emotions, as well as learning. I mean, it's going to show up in the things that the brain is expected to do. Just like for an adult, it's going to show up in the work environment, for a college student in their ability to complete their work or show up to class on time. Um, so life is impacted when neurodiversity is present. Um, and so neurodiversity kind of is compared to people who don't really have those problems, and their brain typically is functioning the way it needs to in every category of functioning. So a lot of times you'll hear people who have developmental disorders like autism or on an autistic spectrum disorder, Tourette's, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, all hyperactivity disorder. All of those kind of fall in a category of neurodiversity because it's the brain not developing at the right speed in all places, and therefore there is an impact to how a person does what they need to do. Um, Neurotypical is a term that's really used to describe um, a person whose neurocognitive functions, right, ability to think and reason, when they fall within society's norms and expectations. So you're a student, you go to class, your homework is in your book bag, you've completed all your work or most of your work. Um, Generally, you do what you're supposed to do in class and you're paying attention, and there's really no issues. There's no issues, no significant issues at home. Yeah, you get into it with your little sister from time to time, kind of normal, but it's not beyond normal. I hope that makes sense. Here's a chart that I like to show because if you're a parent and your child is already in the system in terms of has either a 504 plan or has an IEP, then they've probably had some type of testing. And children are tested academically, but they're also tested cognitively. The cognitive test is really looking at how the brain is learning in specific areas. Verbal comprehension, as well as visual, spatial, fluid or perceptual, which is about reasoning and problem solving, mathematics, memory, processing speed, how fast they can do a task. Memory looks at working memory as well as like long-term memory. How is the brain able um, to do a task and maybe bring another piece of information from another source into that space and continue with that task. Math is a task that requires working memory, spelling, reading. So if there's memory challenges, then a lot of times the learning is impacted. Um, so I say all of that to say this is a chart that kind of helps uh, somebody who's testing, an educator or a medical provider, explain where somebody falls. This is what we call a bell curve, and most people fall in the green, which is the average range. And a lot of people have some neurodiversity going on in their brain, right? But it's how much neurodiversity that really um, is what makes a difference in terms of being average or not average. Now, you could be low average or high average, right? Your brain could be really functioning very well in many different areas, and you're in a high average range. And some of your neurodiversity is shown in creativity or in math and the sciences, and it serves you very well. For others, the challenges might be in the areas of math and science. And a person could still be really intelligent and have high capability, but the capability may be in the arts. And art spans a lot of different areas. It could be athletic, it could be music, theater, it could be designing things, storytelling, architecture, taking care of plants, landscape, hair, skin, and nail care. So, um, intelligence and art spans a lot of different things. But in the society that we live in, a lot of the conversation around neurodiversity tends to focus on learning and the traditional subjects. So this is an important point. I hope I remember to come back to it, that someone who's neurodivergent has strengths and challenges. And some of the challenges may be in these key cognitive learning areas like memory and processing speed, but they also may be very, very strong in more of the creative arts, which um, which speaks to a lot of the strengths that parents should be encouraged to pursue in a child who's neurodivergent, as well as a young adult, encouraging them to explore these other areas of their strengths. Okay, I hope that's a good explanation of this chart because I'm gonna keep it moving. It's got a lot. We'll talk about this thing for about 20 minutes. Y'all will be like, good night, but I want to keep your attention. So let's go to the next thing. All right. So as I explained, neurotypical is, hey, most like other people. Typical, right? Neurodivergent, different. Your brain is different from other people, and then within its ability to do what it does, there are differences too. And so that's what makes the person different, kind of like in the brain and according to the people around them. Now, a lot of times we say that our world should just be more neuro inclusive versus always requiring people to kind of imitate what they're seeing other people do, and trying to be like somebody who is neurotypical or not having neurodiversity. Sometimes that creates problems for somebody who has ADHD or who is autistic, and they're trying to fit in all the time. We want to create an environment that is actually more appreciative and accepting of people who experience these differences in their brain. So the differences tend to impact executive functioning. Now, what is executive functioning? I'm glad that you asked. It's the cognitive process. It's how the brain organizes our thoughts and our activities and our priorities and our tasks, and it's how we manage. It's almost like, hmm, it's like an executive office or an executive officer who's in charge of making sure everything is running the way that it needs to run. So that's what executive functioning. Executive functioning is a set of mental skills that include working memory, flexible thinking, and self-control. We use these skills every day to learn, to work, and manage daily life. So trouble with executive function can make it hard to focus, follow directions, handle emotions, among other things. And just think about that. What that what that really means. If you're having challenges, problem solving and staying organized and making decisions and you're forgetting things, how impairing could that be to your day-to-day life? Now we're thinking about kids, and for kids, their priority is like going to school. And so your main job as a kid is to go to school. And when you get there, you're having all these challenges. So how do you have all these challenges and have a favorable relationship with your teacher? A lot of kids who are experiencing these type of challenges don't have real good relationships with their teachers unless their teachers understand this and they understand what's going on for the child, and they can create a classroom environment that feels more accepting and more create it's designed a classroom that is kind of shaped and molded to allow um, kids who have these kind of challenges to still do well. And there are changes at a classroom that can be made to a classroom, but that's not necessarily what our conversation is today. Although I will highlight some tips at the end of the closer to the end of the presentation. Okay, what I really want you to think about now and just focus on is what the experience would be like if you went to school or you went to work and you kept forgetting things. Oh man, I was supposed to make copies of that. Dang, I don't even know where I put the paper. Oh my gosh. Oh, and now we need this paper for the 9:30 meeting, and oh, I don't know where I put the paper. See, that anxiety that comes with it in a classroom environment for a child who's has a time test. You know how you have a minute or 2 minutes to do all these math problems, but you're forgetting your timetables. 5 times 6 is what? I got an aunt. We used to go grocery shopping, and she would make a count of everything. She would add everything up as she was going along, so she knew when she got to the register how much everything cost. And she would always ask me, "What's 8 times 6?" I mean, she said, "What's 8 plus 6?" I say, "It's 14." She'd be like, "Okay." "What's 6 plus 8?" I'd be like, 14. And then a few minutes later, "What's 9 plus 5?" 14. "What's 5 plus 9?" I mean, I never understood why, but I'm just saying, like, even something as simple as that interfering with your ability to keep doing what you need to do. And so you're in class and you're having issues with your timetables or these multi-step math problems or understanding what you're reading, and now you're falling behind. And if a teacher calls on you, you're like, I really don't know. And the teacher's like, oh, you're not paying attention. And in reality, it's like, I'm trying, but my brain is just not, it's not processing the information. I'm having issues. And these are things that you don't wear, like a broken arm, if you broke your arm, or some other physical injury. These are the things that are happening inside. And unless a person is talking and explaining that they're having issues with executive function and the other person is understanding that this is how it manifests and this might be what it is, then there is an assumption that something is wrong with the person or that they just don't want to do it, as I mentioned earlier. Okay. So anyway, 8 types of executive function. There's probably more depending on who's talking or teaching, but generally it kind of falls in these 8 categories. The ability to adaptively think, meaning problem solve, well, adaptively meaning in an environment, make sense of what's happening in the environment and make adjustments as needed. Planning, coming up with a plan. Uh, that could be a day-to-day task like taking a metro to get to school or taking a metro to get to work and a plan on how you're going to get back. Um, it could be monitoring yourself and just being in tune with what's going on with you and your body and your mind in time and space. It could be self-control, how you're controlling yourself. If you're impulsive or um, really just whatever comes to your mind, saying exactly what comes on your out of your mind, or grabbing or taking something, or just doing whatever you feel the urge to do without any inhibition. Working memory, the brain's ability to take in new information and use that, hold that information, turn it, flip it, use it however you need to flip it, and add new information if you need to, or take away things. Just being able to process information, manipulate it, and keep it in mind, and then draw from it if you need it later on. Managing time, just being where you need to be, planning time in terms of how long is it going to take to accomplish something, and being able to gauge that or estimate that correctly. Organizing, and that could be papers, it could be clothes, it could be shoes, it could be a lot of things. And reasoning and problem solving. I think reasoning and problem solving is one of the biggest ones because this is how we make important decisions. And if we don't know how to solve problems, or our problem solving ability is interrupted because we have executive functioning challenges, that's really difficult. That means that relationships are going to be impacted. That means how we manage our households, how we handle our children. So again, these executive function challenges, they kind of stay with you, so it's not, it's a matter of learning how to do these things in such a way that you're still able to live your life. So if your brain isn't functioning the way you need it to, you may have to come up with little tips, little cues, little strategies to build out these areas that are not naturally doing what you need it to do. All right, so here's just some of the conditions or diagnoses that are affected, that have executive functioning challenges. So autism is there, anxiety. You have enough anxiety, you could have challenges with executive functioning, right? Managing stress. Depression is another where executive functions are impacted. Tourette's, obsessive compulsive disorder. Um, Tourette's is there twice. I was just checking to make sure y'all was paying attention. Sleep. When you are not getting enough good sleep, your executive functions are challenged. I mean, they're impacted. I remember one time I was driving from Chicago, because that's where I'm from originally, back to the DC metropolis. And I remember I was getting tired, and my little brother was riding with me, and he like kept falling asleep. And I was like, "Hey, you the co-pilot, you supposed to stay awake. We talking, engaging you in the front seat, but you knocked out. And we driving through these mountains, and I'm kind of tired. I'm awake, but like it's raining and storming. And I promise I saw a ship the size of the Titanic cross right across the highway. Sleep. Executive function is impacted by sleep. So just food for thought. Uh, when there's language and communication barriers, substance abuse, lots of different things that impact executive functioning. All right, just a few indicators of what autism looks like in case that may be something you're observing in your child and you don't necessarily know what it is. Um, Autism, according to our book that is called the DSM-5, the diagnostic, oh, what's the S stand for? It's been so long, but it's
Statistical?
yes, the diagnostic statistical manual. Thank you so much. Um, but the DSM-5 just really kind of highlights the different what symptoms or conditions we will see that help us determine what this might be versus it's this and not that. For autism, it's the persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction, and that's happening in multiple contexts. Um, so that would look like social and emotional reciprocity, deficits and really just that communication and social. So the verbal and nonverbal communication, there are deficits and it's noticeable. Deficits in nonverbal communicative behaviors. sometimes they just don't get those social cues that we all generally kind of know. But if you're having issues with your understanding of that or comprehension of that, that could be an indicator that autism is in a picture. Uh, de- and you can imagine how deficits in social and emotional communication would affect relationships. So there's challenges with developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. Then behaviorally restricted or repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. And that's identified through repetitive motor movements or stereotype movements or stereotype use of objects or speech. Um, the insistence on sameness. So there's not a lot of flexibility when it comes to routines. And someone who's on autism spectrum generally has a routine that they really like to stick to. And so when we deviate from that, there are, for that individual, it's a stressful event, as well as ritualized patterns of verbal and nonverbal behavior. And so a person can be really preoccupied with certain behaviors and movements and patterns and stay preoccupied for extended amounts of time. Um, Again, these are things that you wouldn't typically see if someone didn't have autism. There's a highly restricted or fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. It's just intense and kind of persistent. Hyper or hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input. So another sign of autism is someone who's really sensitive to sensory, and sensory could be sight, it could be sound, it could be touch, tactile, even taste. Um, uh, and that's generally what's happening in environment for an individual. And then these symptoms are present in the early developmental period, but they may not fully manifest until the person is in different social environments that requires much more engagement. And then this is kind of where we start seeing the challenges and reactiveness to being either challenged by like sensory activated by sensory type things or activated because of a social and emotional load that the individual is just not like really equipped for. Okay, so that's autism. um, ADHD is a little bit different, but there is some overlap between the two. And a lot of times people who have autism also have ADHD. And ADHD is really about the inability to sustain attention for long periods of time. There is the high potential for hyperactive behavior, challenges with listening, trouble following multi-step instructions. There's forgetfulness, difficulty with organizing, planning, staying on task. And then there's a significant risk for lower sleep quantity or less sleep quality when children have ADHD compared to kids who don't. So for someone who's autistic, they there's like a 50 to 70% chance that they also might have ADHD. So everything I talked about on the previous slide, excuse me, plus everything on this slide, that's a lot. That is a lot to deal with. But that is what neurodivergence could look like. Now, autism tends to be a little bit more on the more significant side, but executive function and challenges is um, very much present in both of these cases. So just to show kind of like what's happening in the brain, because we're talking about these differences in the brain. Well, when you look at this column of controls and you see all of this blue and green, that means that the brain is generally working the way that it needs to and kind of normally. When you start seeing the red and the yellow, that's those are indicators that the brain is working harder than what it needs to because there's not enough activity happening or occurring in those parts of the brain in those areas. And so the person is working harder, but they're still not getting the effect or the results that they're looking for. So there's two types of ADHD, predominantly inattentive and combined typed. And so when a person gets diagnosed, it's one or the other. Combined type means they have inattention, but they also are dealing with hyperactive behaviors as well, or impulsive behaviors. Inattention is really kind of just about the ability to not be able to focus. And so the executive function is really in the areas of maybe memory, being able to stay on task, being able to concentrate and focus. So when ADHD or neurodiversity goes undiagnosed, misdiagnosed, or untreated, we see a lower academic achievement. We see challenges with social and emotional adjustment. A lot of times when people have ADHD or autism or some neurodiversity and it's not treated the way that it needs to be, there's other conditions that develop. And a lot of times those conditions develop secondary to the primary disorder, which might be ADHD or autism. So it could be anxiety, it could be oppositional or aggressive behavior, which makes sense. My brain is not working right. I'm not learning like the people around me, or I'm having a hard time fitting in. I can't manage my emotions. It's going to make me angry. And the way that I handle my anger, yeah, I could be oppositional or aggressive or deal with depression. Um, it just makes sense. Sometimes when people deal with ADHD, they may have what we call positive illusory. It's kind of like an inflated self-perception or a lack of self-awareness that could be real, or it could be somebody masking and trying to just not show up as having something going on with them. Because that's the other part of it, right? Nobody wants to be given a label that something is wrong with them. And sometimes kids won't speak up because they don't want to be stigmatized, or parents may not pursue getting tested or getting treatment when they hear that something is going on with their child because they don't want something to be wrong with their child. And if it's something like ADHD, they may not even believe that it's real. But I'm here to tell you that it is real. One other thing that I would say about ADHD is that a lot of times neurodiversity is developed because people are exposed to highly stressful or traumatic situations and experiences. And that might happen in early childhood, but it could happen like at the age of 9 or 10 or 11. And it still ends up kind of turning into or becoming one of these diagnoses. Not so much as autism, but ADHD could potentially still develop. And one of the things that we think is that ADHD is highly hereditary. And so if a parent has it, then the child will probably have it or just have the genes for it. And it could be dormant, right? We have dormant or recessive genes that just kind of are there, but they're just there. They don't get activated at all. But if you have enough environmental stressors or stressful situations, then these genes that are dormant kind of become dominant or start showing up. And when they do, this is what happens. These disorders or conditions kind of develop. Also, youth who are undiagnosed and untreated, they have a higher rate of high school dropout and not graduating, which makes so much sense, right? Your learning environment is difficult to be in, and you just don't like school. And so why would you stay there? You stay as long as you can or as long as you can tolerate it. And then, some drop out. And then they also have a tendency to kind of engage in maladaptive behaviors. Teen pregnancy is high, sexually transmitted diseases, delinquency, incarceration. All of these things are like the outcomes of not getting the care that you need or not taking the diagnosis seriously, because the brain still is having challenges with executive function, and not getting the care that you need or not paying it attention just means that um, that the condition goes still unresolved without coping strategies. And so people will cope any way that they can, healthy or not healthy. So I just want to show this slide to show that there's co-occurring conditions um, that kind of happens. As I was mentioning, there's anxiety, there's depression, but look how likely these other things are that go with these developmental disorders or with significant executive function challenges. Anxiety is high, depression can be high, um, sleep problems. I talked about trauma, anger, irritability, and even eating disorders 13 times as much. That's really important. Okay. So what I want to do is just highlight some of the critical ages where um, ADHD or neurodiversity uh, are impactful. So kindergarten and first grade, third grade is like another critical year, fifth grade, middle school, um, freshman year of high school, junior year of high school, and then even the early years of college. So for kindergartners, this is generally where a diagnosis can occur, or where it becomes like noticeable that there's issues with neurodiversity. Um, Classroom environment has multiple demands versus daycare. Daycare is like, hey, you show up, we're gonna do something fun. At some point, we'll all take a nap. Kindergarten, the structure starts coming in, and when the structure is required, that's where we can start seeing emotion regulation challenges. Um, and we can see how kids are interacting with their peers and how they're kind of becoming accustomed to the classroom norms. Um, with neurodiversity, early challenges in the school environment shapes their perception of school. And that kind of sets the stage for anxiety and depression. Third grade, uh, it's a pivotal time for BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people, persons of color, children who fall in that category, because standardized testing becomes a big thing. Um, there's stronger reading and math expectations. And a lot of, from what we've seen research-wise, you can kind of see how a child is performing up to that point in third grade to kind of maybe even predict school success and career trajectory. At third grade, this is where kids are starting to develop some independence, significant independence, and a significant sense of self. And so with neurodiversity in the picture, the sense of self might already be impacted by all of these challenges in a classroom environment. And this is where kids may notice that they're different from other kids in a class. So super important, if we're seeing these challenges, that we start, getting the kids the help that they need, uh, so that their development of sense of self is not impacted. Fifth grade, um, kids are prepared for middle school. They have become pretty independent. Standardized testing is happening. They start becoming pretty serious about their extracurricular activities, and peer relationships are extremely important. Um, but this is also where they start establishing a reputation. And the mistakes that they've made, there tends to be stronger disciplinary implications. So neurodiversity could be protective in this space because it promotes the expression of creativity and focusing on hobbies and developing friendships. For the sake of a friendship, kids will kind of modify their behavior even if they have neurodiversity. Um, but it's also where challenges in these areas that we talked about can result in a child be withdrawing and kind of finding ways to adapt with their challenges in an unhealthy way. So from middle school to freshman year, this is a peak time in puberty. And anytime the biology of the body is changing, and neurodiversity is in the picture, then oh my gosh, you can imagine the hormones and the brain, and it just, you're going to see it in behaviors, how they are talking and kind of what they're doing or what they're not doing. Because even in middle school and freshman year, they're still kind of developing identity. And of course, in the world we live in today, not only are they developing an identity in real world, but also in the social media world. And that is a very important identity. And so here, kids know, they know if they're having learning challenges, and they also know whether or not they're gonna, whether or not they want to address them. Some of them will, but others are not. Others are gonna because the stigma and not wanting to look like something is wrong with them, they're gonna mask and they're gonna suffer in silence. And so we have to just be more in tune with what's going on with them. Um, This is where kids are really experimenting. Middle school and here, this is where kids are experimenting with their sexual preferences, their sexual orientation, um, and other various behaviors. Now, it doesn't mean that they're like doing things, but some are. Um, but this is just a critical time for real conversations, not judgmental conversations, but real conversations and boundaries. Um,
Dr. Walker,
yes.
I know you said you were going to get to questions at the end, but because you're actually in this topic, we have a question in the chat. Would you like to hear it now or just hold it?
Yeah, let's hear it. This is cool. I prefer some interaction because I don't want y'all to feel like I'm talking y'all to death. So it's good. Good.
Miss Mitchell asked, and she can feel free to unmute to elaborate, but she asked, can you talk a little bit about executive function age versus biological age?
Ooh, oh my gosh, that's a great question. Well, in the world of neurodiversity, executive function, I won't necessarily say executive function age, but I will say that just developmentally, in terms of behavior and maturity, it tends to be a little bit less than what the biological age is. So your 7-year-old may behaviorally and from a thought kind of perspective might show up like 5 or 6. And when kids have ADHD, and in some cases with autism, they tend to like to play and associate with younger peers. But it kind of makes sense, right? If the brain hasn't fully developed in those areas, which is typical of their age group, then playing with a kid who's younger means that mentally they kind of feel like they're on the same level. They're developmentally, it feels like safe, not a lot of judgment, and mentally that's where that kid may be a younger peer. I hope that answers the question. Does it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, and actually that's something else to look for if your 7-year-old or your 11-year-old are playing with kids that are 2 to 3 years younger, and that's their, peer group of choice, that's also an indicator that there could potentially be some neurodiversity going on. So for the 11th grader, they're preparing for graduation or college. There's college entrance exams. Um, there's probably peer and romantic relationships. There should be a post-high school plan. Um, and then exiting those teenage years, preparing for adulthood. Um, This is probably really a very critical time. It's such a critical time that we are doing a research study, a public health research study, and we're looking at young adults and we're looking at high school students who have symptoms of executive dysfunction, executive functioning challenges, but have not been diagnosed or got diagnosed as a kid, but never got the care or the resources. The reason why, because these are such critical years. Kids who have neurodiversity and that are not getting the care or the resources that they need, they probably don't have a plan for college. And if they are going to college, they're probably, I'm not gonna say probably, there is a strong possibility that they won't be successful and they may be returning back home because executive um, functioning challenges undermines their success. And when they're not in an environment where they have a parent that's like staying on top of them and making sure they do what they need to do, they're going to explore a lot of things, right? They're going to explore managing their time and managing their day to day in different ways. And some of those ways may be really healthy, but some of them may be very unhealthy. I mean, you may have kids. I know some of the college students that I see as clients for therapy, they they self-medicate with marijuana if they can't, like, if they're having challenges focusing in class, particularly if they don't have a diagnosis. And so part of the work is, hey, let's get you tested. Okay, it looks like you got neurodiversity. Let's get you medication. Because if you're taking marijuana, that's medication. It's not a healthy medication. It's not a healthy choice, but we want to get you what's going to help you get back on track and stay on track. So many important life decisions happening at these critical junctures that it's so important that if neurodiversity is in the picture or we suspect it, that we help them um, get access to care. And same thing with those first and second college years. Um, the problem with college is that it could be unforgiving. And so if you have undiagnosed neurodiversity and maybe you were able to get through high school, when you show up in a college environment, there are so many adult expectations that if your brain isn't like functioning at the adult level and making like good decisions, um, or you're not functioning like staying organized or getting work turned in or managing your time, then the consequences are greater. You find yourself like outside of that college environment really quickly. And um, whatever resources or benefits you were getting, some of that stuff you may lose, like the scholarships or things of that nature, or funding that was dependent on a certain GPA. And so that kind of fall from grace and coming back into an environment where now you got to get a job and now you got to, you know, maybe you can go to school part-time, maybe not. Um, but these are the kids that kind of end up back at home, and parents are like, oh my gosh, you're 25. Why are you still here? 26. No, you cannot get a key to my house. 27. You know, these tend to be the ones that return home and we can't get them to leave the nest. So we know that neurodiversity undermines success. If you don't know that by now, then I'm going to tell you that it does. And um, just other things to keep in mind. Sometimes kids are doing really well in the earlier grades, and when they start having challenges with some of the more difficult stuff, it may be because it's more of a cognitive load, meaning there's more things to remember, there's more steps to the math, there's more things to know about the different sciences. And so, um, again, they may not want to do the work. They may avoid the work, and it may not be because they're being lazy or not working hard enough. They may just have some brain differences that need to be addressed. So just a little bit about access to care, because sometimes that is a big reason why uh, kids are undiagnosed or access to care are reasons why people don't get the resources that they need. And there's a, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year gap. But the longer you go without getting resources, that means you're getting further and further behind where you should be. And so being behind means you have a lot of catching up to do. And you're probably doing a lot of comparing yourself to other kids your age. So we know that there are differences with identification, assignment, of diagnosis, and that sometimes is based on race or ethnicity or social economic status, right? When you think about neighborhoods, the classroom environment, the ratio between the amount of kids there are compared to the teacher or teaching assistants, all of that creates obstacles for even identifying that someone has executive function challenges. Then there's the instance of overdiagnosis and underdiagnosis, right? Both because sometimes our kids don't get access to specialized care. You see a PCM instead of seeing a psychologist or a trained mental health provider who really knows what they're doing and can help understand what they're seeing and can test appropriately. Then there's differences in the quality of care. So the location where a kid is getting treated in terms of clinics, medication options. A lot of times kids of color they don't get the same amount of appointments that other kids may get. And that's in terms of medical appointments when they actually get diagnosed and start medication. The quality of medication may be different. Again, not getting the consistent appointments to make sure the medication is right or you're getting the right dosage. If a child has an immigrant status, there may be language boundaries and still fewer benefits or less access to care. And then there are those who refuse care, parents and kids, because they don't want to have a label and they don't want to be stigmatized. And then there's parents, family members who don't believe and don't support. And so a kid can have a diagnosis and a parent just not believe that it's real. That could be a problem. And then, of course, educational environments that are not supportive. So for educators, be curious, not assumptive. And we want our educators to get to a place that they're not making assumptions about people based on perceptions or stereotypes. We want to create inclusive classrooms where neurodiverse students interact with or within the educational system. And it's not like in a cookie cutter manner, but it feels authentic and that it's the classroom that kind of creates community. That it's like where learning can happen in multiple methods. So we're reading, but maybe we have handouts and PowerPoint slides, so we're listening and we're just engaging and listening and learning in those different modes. Move towards a model of group regulation and shared compassion and away from competitive atmospheres. So interesting. I attended a conference this past weekend. It was the Neurodiversion 2025 conference. And one of the speakers was a professor at a college, and she said that she took away the grade system. Instead of assigning grades to her students based off the traditional methods, they did something that was like just more inclusive, more community kind of learning. And she said that her students learned so much. They did phenomenally when the grades and all of the competition was taken away, and they were just given an opportunity to learn in a more communal way. Creating and making affirming spaces for students and teachers so spaces in the school where people can go and you can, have an opportunity to kind of like rest your brain and feel affirmed. For us, it used to be the library. I used to love going to the library. I guess, do they still have libraries in schools? Okay, I'm just. Again, instruction in multiple manners, hands-on learning, projects, socially relatable conversations and trends, demonstrations. Remember when we had show and tell, that you bring something from home that you really like. So as soon as I got that Cabbage Patch Kid, the astronaut one, the space, I was like, you going to school as soon as as soon as Monday come, I'm putting you in my backpack. I want to talk about this new toy I got, and I want us to share and ask as many questions as you want. Like, I don't know if that still happens, but it would be great if it did. And integrating music, kinetic, and movement in a classroom environment. Oh my gosh, that just makes class so much fun. For parents and caretakers, we want you to be curious, not assumptive. So just having these conversations with kids and asking them what's going on for them, accepting them for who they are, not for who we wanted them to be, fostering their strengths, talents, and helping them develop an identity that they feel is authentic to who they are, teaching them to be accountable and responsible. So I have a thing. I don't really think kids should get an allowance. Like how you just automatically get money no matter how you act. Now, a parent can set aside an allowance, but I think kids should earn it. They should earn it. They should earn rewards and they should earn privileges, but it teaches them a work ethic, and maybe not so much a sense of entitlement. Like, imagine a kid like, where's my allowance? Like, did you punch a clock? You got a job? Anyway, let me get back to number 4. We want to utilize creative strategies to get access to care. So we hold support groups, and we do that on a platform. I'll talk a little bit about that momentarily. But support groups are great for parents because parents talk about how they got access to care, resources that they learned about that may not be largely public knowledge. There may be people to talk to. Just there's ways for us to enhance access to care, but we just might have to be creative about it. Advocating for your child and teaching your child to advocate for themselves is really important. So if you're a parent and you're meeting with a teacher about your child, it would be great if maybe you have a conversation with the teacher on the front end, but you say, hey, I'm going to bring in Anthony, and all of us are going to collaboratively talk about what's going on, and we're going to hear each other. It's not about accusing. We're just going to figure out how to make environment more conducive to learning and meeting the needs of that child. Collaborate with your child on building them a support network. Everybody needs a support network. Like we all need, this is what I tell some of my clients. Nobody's going to the Super Bowl by themselves, right? You're going to need a defense and an offense. So we build a team and we make sure that we have that team or that sense of community to get to where we're going. Collaborate with your child on identifying and developing the accommodations and strategies that work for them. So when you do get a diagnosis of ADHD or autism or something else, generally you get an IEP if you have more than one condition like ADHD and something else, which tends to be the case for a lot of kids. There's generally some type of learning impairment that's identified. But the beauty in a 504 plan or IEP is that you can build into it the accommodations that are needed, and you can be creative if you know what works. So for some kids, it may be having a hand fidget, little fidget gadgets or something like that, that really helps them stay grounded, stay calm, allows them something to keep their hands moving. And that's just one thing. There's a ton of things, and I can refer you to an article that talks about all these different creative things that parents have asked for that have made the classroom environment much more accommodating and easier for the child to navigate. And so listen to your child if or when they tell you that they're struggling, and become very familiar with community, local, regional, state level resources and programs. All right, so bottom line is that when you're dealing with neurodiversity, it's going to take a variety of skills and tools working together. It's not one thing that is the thing. It's generally a symphony. Okay. So some coping strategies and executive function techniques, it could be deep breathing, mindfulness exercises that help a person kind of regulate and ground themselves. Um, a technique that could be helpful could be listening to music, having playlists, or listening to comedies, or having hobbies, positive self-talk. Like all of these things could be integrated into getting things done. I know when I'm like trying to get some stuff done, cleaning the house or writing medical charts, I might have music playing in the background, or I might take breaks, in between work tasks. And those breaks might be YouTube videos or, you know, comedy or something like that. Um, Little breaks in between may help a person be able to sustain and get a task accomplished. New activities and new things, whether it's food, sports, encouraging a child, or if you're an adult and you have neurodiversity, to try out new things to see how you like them. Consistently um, demonstrating or modeling the desired behaviors that we're looking for in our children, and kind of talking to them and telling them, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm managing this. That's a good technique to help teach some of these executive functions. Um, Using stories, relatable scenarios, examples from movies, even having conversations once a movie has ended to talk about like important lessons learned, or to highlight how somebody navigated a skill or how they were able to manage. Those things kind of stick. Practical situations to work through and practice organization and planning skills. Um, hey, switch slides. I wasn't ready. I have a touch screen and I touched it and it went on to the next thing. um, Other things may be relaxation and self-regulating. I love the idea of a classroom that has like yoga mats, or a space that has yoga mats where we can go to and kind of like teach each other to like ground ourselves, calm ourselves, engage in what deep breathing looks like. There's apps. There's one app called CBTI Coach. It's a Department of Defense app, but the app is really great because it has this one component called Quiet Your Mind, and it has all these different narrated breathing and relaxation exercises. Some of them take like 3 minutes, 5 minutes, but they're really good. Can be done in a group setting or individual setting. You could do it before you take an exam, or a whole classroom could engage in some of these activities. And the lesson is just teaching you how to calm your body or how to relax your body so that you can deal with the next thing that's coming, or so that you could deal with something that just happened. Um, Helping kids to expand their interests from things that they're already interested, by kind of like showing them similarities in something else. Like, hey, you know how you like cars and automobiles? But what about, have you thought about like these highways? Or have you thought about airplanes? And are, isn't that fascinating? Just kind of helping them expand their interest by connecting it with something somewhat similar, and seeing if they will go with it. Pairing uninteresting tasks with pleasurable activities is another great way to help with coping. I talked about like doing work, listening to music. Um, you could pair something else. Maybe you're moving around and maybe dancing a little bit with getting a task done, or as soon as you finish a task, you can kind of engage in something fun or super interesting. But the idea is that making the undesirable tasks a little bit more interesting and desirable. Imagination, visualization, those are good skills to kind of hone in on when you're helping somebody cope, as well as helping them organize and plan. So here's some other coping skills, right? I'm not going to go through every last one of these, but these are just other things that can be done. Exercise is great. I'm not a pet person, but playing with a pet for those who like pets. Cooking a meal, parents cooking a meal with kids, or allowing them to kind of like take the lead on what the meal is going to be, teaching them how to plan meals for the week. Like all of these things are great opportunities to bond, but also teaching them how to kind of like practice executive functions.